this morning, we have in the hot seat Professor XN Iraki. He's been here before, and when we are talking about matters to do with where the economy is going, in my opinion, very few better people to then be able to have that conversation with us today. Prof, good morning.
Good morning, and how are you?
I am well, thank you.
I haven't been here for a long time.
I know. Is something wrong?
That's what we should need to discuss before we go on air. But I believe that wherever I've been, I've been doing the right thing.
You believe you've been doing the right thing?
Yes.
We thank God for you.
But don't ask me for evidence.
of whether you've been doing the right thing or not.
Yes. Evidence is there.
And,
well, we shall see.
When I came back today, I found strangers in the studio. They have not introduced themselves.
Okay.
Strangers.
But I have full trust and faith in them.
Okay. The strangers to your left and to your right, not the one in front of you.
Yes, the ones on my right, my right, and my left.
So the stranger on your left is Dennis Aseto.
Why is he not smiling?
Okay.
You know, I've actually hosted Prof before on KTN.
But on KTN.
But it's okay.
He must have been wearing a mask.
It must have been during COVID times.
On my right does not look very mysterious.
His name is Mark Bichachi.
He bought me a drink one time. But I will not disclose the type of
I was about to ask for the details of those X-Files, but we shall leave that for a different time.
Was the seat high as the one in the morning?
The seat I'm sitting on?
Yes. Was it as high as it was in the morning where you were getting the drink?
It was actually a giraffe seat.
Now you know.
You need more details on that.
Maybe afterwards. So guys, our live streams are up. We did have a bit of a technical hitch, so we lost connection, but we're back. Technology on a Monday morning, I tell you, is a totally different world out there. But here we are, getting back into things, so not to worry. Prof is here this morning. He's going to be talking to us about Kenya's GDP growth, budget and policy challenges. What exactly are we going towards? Public participation on the 2025-2026 finance bill into the budget is happening. The chair of the committee made that very clear last week in terms of what's happening going into the new week. But before we get into those, Prof, we're going to share with you today's proverb. Mark is going to tell you which country you're in this week, and then we would love to get your interpretation of the same. Fair enough?
So, Prof, the proverb today is from Ghana, the land which hosts the Akwasambo Dam, and also a nice little town near Accra, where Jomo Kenyatta, Haile Selassie, Kwame Nkrumah once met to strategize on how to free Africa. Yes, I love this country because it is the one country in Western Africa that reminds me of Kenya, except that they are loud like their neighbors, the Nigerians.
Interestingly, there are three countries that separate Ghana and Nigeria. Everybody thinks that we border each other. We don't.
Yeah.
It's a neighboring country. Do you not say it's a bordering country?
I was just saying that I'm sharing that information. Anyhow.
Yes. You're equally loud. So this equally
maybe
loud
more.
people.
Maybe more.
They're not loud. Ghanaians are not loud.
Ghanaians are not really loud.
I lived in Ghana for a while. Yes,
Okay.
they're loud.
It's because you're Kenyan,
Ghana
so.
also.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
So, Prof, this is our proverb for the day. You must act as if it is impossible to fail.
That proverb should be domiciled in Kenya. It is one of the best proverbs I've heard about a long time. You act as if it is impossible
To fail.
If you look at the economy today, that should be the mantra. That should be the line cry.
Yeah.
You act as if it is impossible to fail.
Yeah.
That means you never fail.
True.
And I'm not surprised that proverb is from Ghana. Very resilient guys. I've been there a number of times. The most memorable thing I remember is not the Kosovo Dam. It is some guys hawking boiled snails on the streets.
Oh, yeah.
Don't ask me whether I ate.
And they're huge.
Yes. And the way you are looking at me, you could have tasted. And I hear there's some Kenyans who are exporting snails to Ghana.
Yeah.
Kenyans are very entrepreneurial.
Yeah. They're acting as if failing is an impossibility. You know?
In fact, by exporting snails, that shows how it is impossible to fail.
There
True,
you go.
True. And that is why, after every proverb we say, a big head is a big load.
You need to you really need to let go of the big head.
But I have some concern.
Yeah.
Before you gave me the English version of that proverb, why not in a can?
Because he doesn't speak it.
But at first I don't speak, I can, and the closest thing that I'm capable of almost speaking of you are the tree, which is Akwesi, Debbie. What other thing? Debbie is no. What else?
We can just keep it at no.
I'm sure Ghanaians will be very happy.
We'll just keep it at no and we'll be fine. Okay, so we're going to get into the conversation this morning. Finance Bill 2025, 2026 is where we are. Finance Bill into the budget, and then looking at, budget policy and appropriations. We're into hectic, or rather intense public participation currently, getting into it rather, in terms of what Kenyans think about this new bill. And even as we do, getting into the time where the budget then will be read. The questions are about GDP growth and budget and policy challenges. Let's start from the policy challenges that we see. That we've been dealing with a flailing economy for some time. We've talked about inflation dropping, but we can't see the results of that dropping of inflation on the tables and in the pockets of Kenyans. Where are we currently, Prof, from your point of view?
Let me start from the beginning. GDP growth. One of the news that should be trending in Kenya today and should be discussed in the State House, on the streets, in the hamlets, should be the decline in GDP growth rate from 5.7% in 2023 to 4.7% in 2024. Because once the GDP growth rate slows down, it has consequences on the economy. And it's not surprising that before we read the budget, we look at the economic survey, how the economy has performed in the previous period. Because that gives us very good insight into our next budget. Because the next cycle should depend on the previous cycle. So when the GDP does not grow, there are some consequences. For example, job losses. If you have a business, you have fewer customers. You make less profit. And in the worst case, people are not able to pay their debts. It's not surprising that a few days ago, there was a very long list of late defaulters by City County of Nairobi. It's not surprising that if you look at the pages of the diaries, there are very many pages that have property and businesses being auctioned. So I think that should be the starting point in our discussion about what is happening in the Kenyan economy today. It's not growing as fast as expected. And people might ask, why is the economy not growing as fast as expected? There are two reasons. One, the economy grows when people consume or when people invest. So it shows that we're not investing enough, we are not consuming enough. And why are we not doing that? Because we are not very optimistic about tomorrow. If you remember what has happened in the last 2 years, there has been a lot of pessimism. So we want to postpone investment. We want to postpone our consumption. We want to postpone paying debts and other obligations. So one way to turn out the economy and maybe have a higher growth rate is to make Kenyans feel good. Let's Kenyans believe that tomorrow is better than today. Who is going to do that? You and me and our political leaders.
And we talk about our political leadership in the country and the key role that they play in ensuring that there is trust, there is stability, especially in the business environment. But one would beg to ask now, for us to bring in investors, for the economy to do better, there has to be a proper environment for doing business. And one would argue that currently does not exist in the country. So how then should, say, policymakers, you and I, look at how we can improve the business environment in the country for things to improve?
The starting point is always the image of the country. If you ask anybody on the streets of Nairobi where they would want to migrate to, they'll tell you, I want to go to the US. Or I want to go to UK. I want to go to Europe. And they have not been there. But those countries have created a very positive image of their country. And that attracts investors, attracts tourists, attracts immigrants. So we must start by changing the image of our country to make it feel like it's a very homely place. It's a place everybody wants to come. Now, beyond the policies, people might have a very good image of the country, but they eventually come in and find out what's happening. For example, I don't know whether any of you is married, but before you married that girl, you gave her a very good image of your home, of your family. But when she came to your home, she faced the reality whether you are a good family, welcoming, and so on. So when investors come, they meet the reality. And that reality includes things like taxes. Is paying taxes very easy? Is it punitive? Is it militarized? Apart from things like taxes, you have to think about services.
Yeah.
Do you have good roads? Do you have water? Do you have power? Everybody's complaining about power being very expensive. So investors don't come because they love you. They come because they want to make some money. And by making money, they also benefit the country. So let's improve the image. But apart from improving the image, let's improve the services.
So you have to actually improve, because when we talk about GDP, essentially we're talking about the economic value that is present in a nation in a particular period.
Yes.
Right? So when you look at it and you say that the number has been dropping over time, that your manufacturing industry perhaps has taken a hit, that you're not making as much as you should, that even what you have available, either you're not selling, you're not exporting, you're importing, you're spending more on what's coming from outside as opposed to what's coming from inside. Is the panacea to that essentially then doing more within the country and then selling it out?
I like your question, because there are three words I would like to use to react to your question. One of them is productivity. We need to be more productive, do more with what we have. Number two, we need to think about capacity utilization. Have we utilized the capacity this country have? Whether it is schools, whether it is in hospitals, whether it is in our industries. Even before we think of bringing investors, even before we think of expanding what we have we done enough with what we have?
Sure.
For example, if you look at SpiceFM, the one we are in the studio today, have you done enough with what you have here? Have you been able to get all the money you could have got from adverts and so on before you think of expansion? So let's be more productive, let's be more efficient, and very important, let's also focus on quality. Because you talked about export. Because one way to expand our economy is to export to other countries.
Sure.
So people are not going to buy your things because just for the sake of
because you're selling them.
Because you're selling them, because they're on sale. They want quality. They want things that are long-lasting, things that will do what they're supposed to do. So let's also not think about our country only, but also the export market, the East African community, which I feel we have not utilized enough, the African Free Trade Area, and the rest of the world. Because the Kenyan market is so small, 55 million people, but the world has 8 billion people. So if you can think more broadly about the rest of the world, not just about our country and our counties, then we can turn out the economy.
You know, Prof, your statement is quite interesting. The Africa Free Trade Agreement, for example, has been held up by the Southern Africans for a while. We're talking of the EAC. Uganda remains our biggest trading partner by a mile. That's where we send most of our products. But people hearing us are mostly wondering about what is government doing. That is really the question that is at everyone's mind whenever the economy is being spoken of. And then, of course, comes down to the issue of two things: taxes versus national debt, right? So balance for us the role of the Kenyan in terms of producing services and goods to export, the role of these agreements that we have, for example, the EAC agreement, which seem to be shaking a lot of late, given that we are exporting Mathakarua more than anything else. And then the role of government. You know, the government says that we've got a big debt, and what is taxes doing in terms of balancing this whole equation out?
You're asking a very broad question.
Yes.
And I am happy there's not a cut or an exam, so I don't need to tax my head a lot. But let's start with agreements.
Yes.
The East African agreements, the African Free Trade agreements, the WHO, and other multilateral and bilateral negotiations. One of the things that I have always argued, correctly or not correctly, is that Kenyans are not very good negotiators. And I think that's one area we have been losing. Whether we are negotiating with Europeans, with the neighbors, East African countries, or whoever you're negotiating with, are we able to get the best deal in our agreements? So that is one thing we must focus on. So that when we go to a negotiating table, we have facts, we have data. And we also must not think about today, but longer. If we come up with an agreement today, how is it going to be 10 years from now? Will the circumstances have changed? So we must get enough data to be good negotiators. But let's go back now to the next level, the government.
Yes.
The government all over the world is supposed to facilitate us to do what we are supposed to do, to trade, to offer services, to manufacture and so on. Because if you look at the government worldwide, most government don't own any business, except maybe in communist countries. But in a country like Kenya, the government owns very few businesses. I know it has shares in certain parastatals, but the government doesn't do business. It's me and you who does business. So the government is supposed to facilitate us, come up with good laws, good regulations, good incentives, give us infrastructure, give us water, give us power, give us whatever is supposed we are supposed to get. So once we get those basics, we shall do the rest. And you just need to go to a place like Kamakis, or take a superhighway, or even between Gong and Isinya, where a road has been built. Kenyans will come and do the rest. I've always argued convincingly that roads are very important because you can get water from the rain or from a borehole. You can get power from solar, or you can even use firewood to light your house, but you cannot build a private road. So it's very important that when it comes to facilitate us to do business, the government should start with the roads. And it's very important the government should also ensure there is security, so that when I go to do business, I don't need to close at 9 p.m. because I fear robbers and gangsters. I should be able to operate 24 hours. So once the government facilitates that, I can assure you we shall do the rest. And Kenyans are creative and entrepreneurial. The last question, and you're asking me too many questions. Can I refuse to answer some of them?
Unfortunately, you cannot. It is not the nature of the hot seat.
And tax. So when you talk about funding government services, because the government has to employ people and have to build all this infrastructure I'm talking about, where does the government get money from? It gets money from tax or from debt. Of course, the easiest way to get money is from tax, because it's a law. And once people pay taxes, you don't need to talk about any other obligation. Once people pay taxes, mambo imeisha. But debt, you have to pay later on. So what has happened in the last 2 years, the government has been torn between two things. Do we tax more Kenyans, or do we tax more so that we get less debt? And then the problem with the tax is you feel it immediately. You see it on your pay slip. Or if you're a businessman, you see it on your profit. The beauty about debt is you can spread it out to the next generation. In fact, some of the people who will probably pay our debts are not yet born. So what the government is supposed to do is, we know the government needs money, but it needs to balance between tax and debt. There's nothing wrong with the debt, by the way, as long as you put it in the right use. I'm sure all of you have some debt somewhere. So what the government should do is to balance debt and tax, to make sure that it does not stop us from doing business. It does not serve as disincentive. And once we do that, like all even developed countries, there's tax, there's debt. There's no reason why we cannot turn down this economy. But the government should not be seen as an enemy of economic growth by the citizens. And that's my biggest worry.
If we look at the reality of the situation, because I think sometimes we get wrapped up in the paperwork and we get wrapped up in the processes, like currently where the country is, public participation, it must be done because it's constitutionally demanded. But the reality of the situation is something that we don't want to focus on. And that is the amount of debt that the country actually does have. That if you go into this budgeting process that we are currently in, that it doesn't matter what you do. You're going to raise all this money. You're going to have a budget. Then you're going to have the appropriations bill. You're going to raise all this money for you to be able to get certain things done. But the first charge on any money that comes into the country is debt and the repayment of the same. And we're looking at upwards of 70 shillings per every 100. That leaves with 30 shillings to then be able to do everything else. So this development that we speak of, this recurrent expenditure, which is a reality, there is no way it is sufficient to cover any of it. Now, whereas we say that debt appropriated is not an issue, what we are dealing with is debt, unfortunately, misappropriated, and that leaves very little wiggle room to do the things that would essentially help a country progress economically. So Kenya is in a bit of a quagmire, or maybe a lot of one. What are the ways to get out of this, since the debt is there and you must pay it back, but we continue to budget year after year?
I like your opening statement. Debt is a fast charge. And I wish ordinary Kenyans like you and me were doing the same. So that if you have my debt and you get
pay
some
me
money,
first.
You pay me first.
Yes.
Because ordinary Kenyans do it the other way around.
Yes.
Debt is the last charge.
Yes.
But I wish all of us were like the government.
Yes, please.
I think that's a very pertinent question. 7 out of 10 shillings go to pay debt. Now, unfortunately, the current government might not have incurred that debt. But the way government operates is even the debts that either been incurred had to be paid by someone, because government is government. So one way to pay this debt and reduce it, surprisingly, is to make us more patriotic, to make us feel good and patriotic about this country, so that we are more willing to pay tax instead of borrowing. But how do you do that? One easy way is to make sure that any tax that is collected is put into the right use.
There, yeah.
Because once I see that the money that my tax is being put into the right use, I'll not even try to evade taxes or avoid taxes, because I know my tax is serving me. I will make sure there are no potholes, the street sites are working, there is drugs in the hospitals, the school fees is paid on time, or the school capitation is paid on time.
Oh, don't even get me
Once we
started.
see that, we are going to pay taxes. Now, if the people don't see their tax going to the right use, they will not be very encouraged to pay the taxes. Now, let me take you back a few years ago when President Kibaki became the president. If you remember, he never did any magic. He just made us feel good about our country. Najivunia kuwa Mkenya.
Kenya.
So people are willing to pay taxes, they are willing to start businesses, and the economy boomed. So one of the things that our political leaders should do today is to make us feel good about ourselves, to feel patriotic.
How do you do that? Let me give you an example. I mean, it was a great thing, lovely stuff that we saw last week, whereby a 0.9 kilometer road is supposed to be built for the staggering amount of 800 million shillings, which in my opinion, maybe a little bit too much as it was. When you look into the books later on, you see that the same road, it did not increase in kilometers. The same road, according to the books then, was constructed or is being constructed or will be at 8 billion shillings. Okay? Yeah, in this country.
So
8 billion shillings. So when we see things like that, because we're trying to make the connection, aren't we, Prof, to say that what are these things that then would make you feel good about your country? I'm hard pressed to imagine that on one side, there are children whose examinations are in limbo today because the 5,000 bob that they should pay for a final exam, or the 800, 700 shillings that they should pay for an assessment exam, that many people cannot afford. We cannot find the money for it. But we can somehow misappropriate 800 million shillings. I need to know how that then becomes a reality that people will feel patriotic enough to pay when we see these glaring examples of misappropriation.
And I think that now completes the jigsaw puzzle. Because if people have to feel patriotic and pay taxes and work harder and be more efficient, it means that their money must be put on the right use. And one of them is to make sure there's no corruption or to reduce corruption. Because one of the things that annoys any Kenyan in this country more than anything else is actually corruption. And corruption, unfortunately, if you remember, again, I'll take you back to President Kibaki's inaugural speech, because I remember listening to it. He said something that was very significant. Corruption will stop being a way of life, or corruption will cease to be a way of life. And I'm sorry to say that in the last 2-3 years, we have not had, or we have not focused enough on corruption. Because once Kenyans see their money is being wasted, then they will probably say, if my money is being wasted or being eaten by some other people, why should I work very hard? And that's why you are seeing a lot of Kenyans trying to leave the country. They want to migrate and go elsewhere because they believe systems are better. But I can assure you that a very small percentage of Kenyans own a passport. So majority of us are not going to leave this country. So the best thing to do is turn it loud. So I think it's the obligation of our leaders to make sure that they reduce corruption. They put that money to the right use. Because as long as that is not happening, people will be pessimistic. People will not work as hard as expected. People will not save as much as expected. They will not invest as much as expected. And even outsiders might not come to invest in our country. So I know it is something hard, but I remember it happened during Kibaki's era. Why can't we do that now? Why can't we reduce corruption? Why is it so hard to get people who are corrupt? Is it that hard? Is it that hard to take them through the court system?
Yes.
Now, let me ask a question. When there's a presidential petition after we go to the polls, that case is resolved in 3 weeks.
Yes. According to the law,
yes.
you must.
Why can't we change the law so that every case is resolved in at least 2-3 months. Why should a case drag for 6-7 months or
10 years?
10 years? So I don't know why it is not possible to do that.
Because if we do that, we'll have no politicians left in this country.
I don't think that is true.
We're talking about GDP growth. We're looking at budget 2025, 2026, and also looking at policy challenges. Professor X and Iraki, an economist, is here with us in the studio this morning, and we are looking at so what can we actually do to turn things around? We're going to come back and maybe visit the GDP question just a little bit more to say, so how do you actually start to grow your economy? And these maybe are the things that we really ought to be focusing on. Politics of economics, and that's what we're getting into as we're looking at this period where we're finding it so interesting how numbers will or will not play.
Prof, what is interesting to me, and you've mentioned Kibaki. I remember Kibaki had Anglo-leasing, and there was a bit of corruption during his term. You've got Uhuru Kenyatta, you've got the COVID thing, you've got NYS. You've got all that. And of course, this government too has been accused of corruption. What is the difference between the corruption now and then? Because there seems to be this flowery way we look at Kibaki's regime, and it doesn't seem to flow through as a narrative to other regimes.
That's an interesting question, because as far as I'm concerned, corruption is corruption. It doesn't matter under whose regime.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter which individual. But I think one of the big questions that surprises me about Africa is how corruption is always in the headlines.
Yes.
There's corruption in other countries, but it's never in the headline. And that has a very big effect on the image of a country. So whether it is from Kibaki era, Uhuru era, President Ruto's era, I don't support any corruption. But I think what I perceive from what you have just stated is that there has not been enough political will to fight corruption in all the three regimes. And that's what Kenyans are looking forward to. Because some of our leaders have publicly said how much is stolen each day, each year. And people always ask in the privacy of their thoughts that if so much money is stolen, why are you telling me why are you increasing our taxes? Why are you telling me to pay more taxes? If we can reduce that, if we can recover that money or get that money by reducing corruption. So I think we need political will to fight corruption, because it is a milestone on the necks of every Kenyan. It doesn't matter under whose regime, corruption is corruption.
Okay. Prof, you've mentioned, if we go back to the GDP growth over the years, 2023, we talk about 5.7%, 2024 down to 4.7%, but the projection was 5%. And we talk about 2025, the projection is at 4.8%. And we talk about a GDP that continues to go lower and lower year in, year out. But then again, you also find Kenyans who are not patriotic in terms of paying taxes, simply because they look at how the money is being spent and on things that are happening, talk about corruption, and no one really wants to pay these taxes. So then the pressure would be on the government. How do they turn these around in making sure that Kenyans, first of all, feel good about their country and they want to play their role in making sure that the economy is working? You've talked about good political goodwill in terms of dealing with corruption and changing the image of the country, but do we even have that good political goodwill where we start today, and how is that affecting the GDP and the economy of the country?
It's very interesting when you look at reports by World Bank and other observers of the Kenyan economy. There's a word they keep on using, business sentiment. Why the GDP is not doing very well is because of the business sentiments are very negative. If you look at what happened last year when Generation Z demonstrated on the streets of Nairobi, there were repercussions because people are saying if through these riots, some businesses were closed, others never recovered. So people feel that in future that might happen again, and they are very careful when they think of investing or expanding what they have. So if that's what I mean by saying that if the business sentiments are not positive, then people keep off, or they don't invest as much as expected. And I think what we should be spending time on here is asking, how can we turn things around? Because the economic growth of a country is made of two things, just like a pair of scissors, the public sector and the private sector. And you need both braids to cut. I'm sure you cannot use one braid of a scissors to cut. So the public sector, read the government, must do its part.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. You must facilitate You must make sure that Kenyans are facilitated to travel.
Yes.
They are facilitated to get power. They are facilitated to get roads. They are facilitated to go to hospital, to get a good education. But you also must look at the private sector part of it, because those are the people who really generate the money. So the private sector must focus on being efficient, being productive, being innovative. But if one of the breeds does not work, then the pair of scissors are not going to cut.
Yeah.
And that's why we are saying that the private sector might do its part. But if the government does not do its part, then a lot does not happen. So we need more dialogue between the private sector and the public sector.
Right.
And that is why public participation is very important, in my opinion.
But beyond the dialogue, and I think that's probably one of the things that we suffer from the most, is the implementation. When I look at what things that happened during the Industrial Revolution, is that somebody was doing something so manual, and they realized that a number of things were happening. The population was growing. And so this thing that they saw that they were doing, whether it was the making of bread or transport, that they needed to move from point A to point B, and then they started to mechanize. They saw that we can do more if we are more efficient. We can grow economically if we have this thing working and it works better for everybody then to be able to use. And they realized very quickly that the more people who are brought into this game, then we could collect more. And we could use that to essentially run nations. It's a no-brainer for me. It's not magic. It actually works. That the more people you bring into the pool, everybody chaka, a little bit, you grow the thing. So often I'm befuddled because I wonder, then why is it so difficult for us to understand this, and then for us to actually apply it? And I wonder why we cannot be then more radical in our approaches to some of these things, because surprise, it's not just Kenya who suffers this thing. Why can't we be so radical? Because like when you see that there's a cancer that's eating away, the doctor doesn't have a conversation with the cancer. He cuts it out and he says, let's now heal from here. Why do we keep budgeting big budgets? We know we don't have the money. We budget more than is actually available. Then we go look for it later. We steal half the thing and then we can't send children to school. Why is it so difficult to be radical in nature when it looks towards a progressive economy?
That's a simple question to answer. Political reality. We cannot be, because we are hostages of politics. I will give you a good example. The government is having a serious deficit. Every budget, every time we read the budget, there's a deficit. So how do we reduce the cost of running the government? The most radical thing to do would be to reduce the number of government workers.
Yes.
Because if you look at the amount of digitalization in the government, it logically follows we need fewer workers. But today, if you start laying off government workers, the political backlash would be so serious. People would lose votes, people would lose elections because of that. So we have not become politically realistic. And that's what we need to do.
Are we ready to progress economy? Are we actually ready? Do we want it?
I don't think so. I don't think we are ready to make hard decisions. And I don't know who is going to make hard decisions. And you say, I will make hard decisions. Even if I lose next in 2027, people later on will realize what I was doing. I don't think we have somebody who is going to do that. But if you look at the other part of it, there's evidence that we have been close to industrial revolution. And it's only that a critical mass of Kenyans do not seem to have been bought into that. I'll give you two examples. Think of the contribution of Boda Boda to the Kenyan economy. Think of the contribution of M-Pesa to the Kenyan economy. Can we have M-Pesa in the government, for example? The way the government is run like M-Pesa. That efficiency, that convenience. So if we can get those innovations into governance, I'm sure this country can make a difference, or this country can turn around. The question is, who is going to bail the cat? All these things we are discussing here are public and known. We know about them. People know that if we made certain changes, policy changes, there would be a difference. But nobody is willing to bail the cat because of political repercussions. Remember that our political leaders, at the back of their mind, they always think about the next election. And that's why there is a lot of focus now on 2027, which is very unfortunate. Because the focus now should be on turning the economy around. Making sure that the economy expands to maybe 5.7 or even beyond that. And remember that during Vision 2030, we envisaged a growth rate of 10%. We have never got it.
Never reached it.
Yeah.
And that's what should be the focus today. Because I guarantee every politician in Kenya, if the economy turns around, you'll definitely get your votes.
You see, Prof, we talk about, you've mentioned the need to turn things around, and they need to have a politics away from economies of the country. But seems as though all we do is just play politics. Economy comes second, or is actually not even a conversation that the leadership of the country is having. So how do we delink politics from economy and GDP of the country and just make sure that we focus on what is important?
That's the elephant in the room. If you remember when we were campaigning in 2022, as an economist, I was a very happy person because the 2022 campaign was about economics, if you remember. And for the first time in the Kenyan political system, the economy was at the front, politics was at the back. But as soon as the election was won, things reversed. Politics came to the front. So one of the ways to make things change is to make Kenyan voters realize that they have more power than they think. So if voters held their politicians accountable, and one easy way to do that is if a politician has not been doing what he's supposed to do, and he calls you for a public rally, don't attend. I assure you that if a politician go to a political rally and nobody comes because he's not doing the right thing, the next 1 month he will improve. You see a lot of changes.
But usually how he improves is he comes back with 500 shillings for every person who attends. And that's a key question. Prof, my question to you is this, as you address the politician and what should be done. We live in a very real space, right?
Yes.
Kenya's economy has not actually shrunk. Its growth has shrunk. Those two things are
the
different.
growth rate,
Yeah. Those two things are very different and key to remember. If President William Ruto was listening now, okay, what are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things you'd ask him to do to change from 4.7 to 5.7? What can he practically actually do?
There are probably 3, 4 things that I would probably ask any politician to do. One of them is fight corruption. Because to me, that is Kenya's problem number 1.
True.
In fact, if we reduce corruption in this country, a lot of other things will get into place.
Fact.
Because there will be money available for schools, there will be money available in hospitals, there will be money available for roads. Kenyan sentiments will become more positive. Number 2 is we must make sure that we preach optimism in this country. I don't know how many of you have traveled abroad. When you go abroad and you are away for a week or so, you are very sober.
Yeah.
But as soon as you get back into this country, something happens.
Stop selling it.
Yeah, and you get sucked into this cycle of pessimism that things are bad.
Yeah.
So we must make this country a more positive country.
That is very important.
And if we can do that, I see no reason why things can turn around. And number 3, let's focus on innovation, efficiency, and productivity.
Okay.
Let's see what we can do with what we have. Before we call even foreign investors, before we call people from other countries, what have we done with what we have? And 4, and very important, as a Kenyan, remember that you are the key economic player. The government comes, in fact, you are the one who sustained the government through taxes and so on. Even the debt, you are the one who paid.
Yes.
So let's Kenyans remember that at the end of the day, it's about them.
Yeah.
So also ask yourself, what can I do for myself?
Yeah.
The government might not do much, but what can I do for myself? Because if each of us does what he's supposed to do,
Yes.
the government comes and helps us, we can turn things around. I always get amazed when I look at the size of a country like Qatar or UAE. Very small countries.
Tiny things.
Or Singapore, very small countries.
Yes.
But they have done so well in the last 50 years that we use them as examples. So what have they done? There's nothing magical. They simply did what they can with what they have.
Yes.
They focused outside, and today they're economic superpowers.
You know what I find amazing about what you're saying, Prof, is the power of a positive outlook on an economy. And I've sat with many an economist and talked about, and they've literally said that the sentiment towards an economy can sometimes be more important than actually what people are doing, because if people feel better, they're able to invest more. How then can we, as the media, take up that role? How do we tell the good story?
I'll start by challenging you. Every week, I saw in the media headlines on scandals.
Yes.
You have talked about agro-leasing. You have talked about all the scandals in each of the presidencies. Why didn't you list the success cases?
Well,
because what I found nowadays is that the people who are corrupt get more publicity than the good people.
Yes.
It's like when the exam results are out, KCSE, we publicize the A's.
The got 0 point.
But let's also give positive stories. I'll give you a good example. If you watch the American media or the American TVs and so on, have you ever seen an insane American or a disabled American?
They don't show it.
They don't show it.
Are they there?
Yes.
By the millions, actually.
So why don't we do the same in this country? I'm not saying we cover things up, but let's be positive.
Yes.
So one way for the media can do is to bring success stories. And another way is what we are doing now. We are discussing issues openly and not hiding anything. Because when we tell the truth, when we share the data, people will be able to make better decisions. And I think next time when I come here, I want to find a border rider here sitting next to me. I want to find an M-Pesa agent here telling me the economy has been very bad. This is how we have done it. Because I think we are focused too much on the top and forgotten at the bottom. Because the people who run this country are the people at the bottom of the pyramid. They are the people you find at 5 a.m. going to work walking, not the people who are taken to work on cars. And I think we need to focus more attention on those small success cases because they make a big difference.
True. But then again, even when you have these discussions, Prof, there is the need for the environment to create such conversations to happen. Because yes, even when one is calling out the government, there is fear that I will be apprehended. So such conversations do not get to happen as should, which then brings about the question of public participation. Because we say public participation is not only just a law, but it is an integral part in ensuring that the economy gets to do better, because Kenyans have discussed, they have negotiated themselves around this economy. So how then do we create that balance such that public participation happens, that these conversations get to happen, and that we as a people don't feel as though if we have these discussions in public, I'm going to be picked up?
There's an example I have kept on giving. I'm not boasting, I'm just informing you. I was on a Saturday morning somewhere in Mississippi in the US. I found a crowd of people on a street, and I stopped to find out what they were doing. And I was told there was public participation on naming a street. Naming a street.
Yes.
So what people in other countries have realized that, and this is a mistake we have in this country, when we vote our leaders in, whether they're MCAs, senators, president, and so on, we wait until the next 5 years.
Yes.
We are supposed to be vigilant throughout, so that once we vote our people, wait a minute, we have made you an MCA, we have made you an MP, and two, we have entrusted our taxes with you. Anybody can tell you in any country, if you are left to do what you want, you do the wrong thing. So the voters must be vigilant throughout. And that's why public participation is important. That you come and ask your people or your readers, we have given you the money. What do you want to do with it? Is it the best thing you can do? So the moment we hold them accountable, they are going to change. But nowadays, public participation is very timid. In fact, it's sometimes done as a legal requirement, not to improve the debate, not to improve the budget, not to improve other things. Let's take public participation seriously.
I mean, it goes the adage that if you actually show people how to treat you, or you actually show people how to respond to you. So if we're looking, because this is an economic question or conversation that we are having, but the truth of the matter is that it intermarries into so many other things. So here we are, and we're saying that leadership should actually do better. And one of the ways that they can do better, be accountable about resources, is if the people are constantly keeping them in check. Now, from what you're saying, do you see a turnaround whereby if leaders expect that people are going to be vigilant in their citizen-centered governance, if they know that people will be vigilant in the question asking in terms of what has happened, that people will be vigilant, then you're not going to wake up one day and find that the seal is gone, kind of thing. Do you see then that we can actually start to turn this thing around on its head and not wait for a Messiah to come?
That's why we vote every year or every 5 years. In fact, one of the things we have never remembered, or Kenyans don't remember, and other citizens don't remember, is the reason why we vote every 5 years is very simple. Now, if you do something wrong in a company, we sack you or we punish you. Now, if politicians don't do the right thing, after every 5 years, we tell them to go home. So voting is not just about getting new readers. It's about renewal of the system. It's a way of evaluating our readers. Have they done what they're supposed to do? But my argument is we should not be evaluating our readers after 5 years. It should be continuous.
Over 5 years.
And I don't understand how Kenyans behave, because we pay taxes and then we fold our arms. We should be following how that tax is used, because it is our money. In fact, I always expect at the end of when the budget is being read, and I hope that is going to happen this time, the last statement should be, I thank the taxpayers of this country for sponsoring this budget. They are never thanked.
Yeah.
I see breaks on the road saying this road was sponsored by this and this. But I never see something like this road was sponsored by the Kenyan taxpayers. So we vote, we pay taxes, but we don't follow up that money with the people who use it.
And we should.
That's our work.
Professor XN Iraki, economist, has been our guest this hour. We've actually looked at GDP growth. We've looked at the budget and policy challenges. Thank you so much for being here. If anything, we remember to keep vigilant.
Thank you very much. And today I was rewarded with a cup of coffee.
A hot one at that.
And I hope it was grown in Kenya, not imported.
Come again. You never know what will come into your cup next. Thank you so much.
I'll be there.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.